We've all got a big decision to make about who leads the country for the next 5 years, who has power and influence in Westminster. You get the opportunity to have your say in the election on July the 4th. Over the next few weeks, we'll bring you 7 interviews with 7 party leaders. Tonight it's the turn of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Prime Minister, welcome. My promise to you, to everybody watching, is that everything you say in the next half hour or so will be broadcast in full. I want to give you, all the leaders I interview, the chance to make your case to people who've got to vote. I simply ask that you try and answer the questions that I ask you. Questions, to be clear, that you have not been told about, that you don't have any advance warning of.
Well, good evening, Nick. Nice to be here. Looking forward to it.
We're going to talk a lot about policy, a lot about the choice that you think faces people. I want to begin, though, with the fact, to put it bluntly, it does feel for you, doesn't it, rather like it's not stopped raining since the day you walked out of Downing Street to announce this election.
Well, what I'd say is I've been out and about every day since this election campaign started, talking to people about the choice, as you said, at this election, because it's an important moment for our country. We've been through a tough few years, and I do believe at this point we have turned a corner, and now is the chance for us to build on the progress that we've made. And I want to deliver a more secure future for everyone in our country. And I believe I'm the right person to do that because we've got a plan that is clearly working on the economy, although of course there's more to go. And I'm prepared to take the bold action that's necessary to do that. And that's what I'm energised to talk to people about.
We'll talk about the plan, we'll talk about the policy. First of all, though, and you know that this is what people are talking about, I want you to look at a photograph. I want you to look at this photograph. The President of the United States, the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, and for the United Kingdom, your predecessor, David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary. How do you feel when you look at that photo of D-Day at Omaha Beach?
Well, the last thing that I wanted to do was cause anyone any hurt or offence or upset, which is why I apologised unreservedly for the mistake that I made. And I can only ask that I hope people can find it within their hearts to forgive me, and also look at my actions as Prime Minister to increase investment in our armed forces, to support our armed forces, but also to ensure that veterans have a minister sitting around the cabinet table with unprecedented support to make this the best country in the world to be a veteran, as a demonstration of how deeply I care about this community and what they've done for our country.
So you said it was a mistake and you've apologised. And then a few days later, you went further and said, as you just have, that you hope people could forgive you. Do you understand that for quite a lot of people watching, I think, they simply think that the basic duty of the Prime Minister, the duty, was for you to be in that photograph and not David Cameron?
Well, that's why I've apologised unreservedly for the mistake, and I hope people can find it in their hearts to forgive me. My duty is also to make sure that this is a country which looks after our veterans, which is why I'm proud that there is a Veterans Minister sitting around the cabinet table, a dedicated office for Veterans Affairs with more support for our veterans, because I care very deeply about their well-being and making sure that we repay to them the debt of gratitude we owe for everything that they've done for our country.
People have heard what you've said, and you've said it a couple of times. Nigel Farage has said he thinks you don't understand, you don't care about what he called our culture, what he called our history. He even said that you were not basically patriotic. Is he playing with fire by bringing your heritage into this argument?
Well, Nigel Farage can answer what he exactly meant by those comments. I'm not going to get involved in that because I don't think it's good for our country or good for our politics. Now, obviously, I disagree with him, and when it comes specifically to our armed forces, again, people can judge me by my actions. I'm someone who... The question's
not about your armed forces. It's about you and your relationship with him. And it's clear you don't want to talk very much about him. You want to talk, and we will, about the choice between you and Keir Starmer. The problem with that is that Nigel Farage has destroyed David Cameron's premiership. He helped bring down Theresa May, and he's now coming for you. And isn't your problem that many Conservatives think he's more of a Conservative than you are?
Well, at the end of the day, on July 5th, there is only going to be one person that's Prime Minister.
But I'm
it's
asking
Keir
about Nigel
Starmer.
Farage.
Well, and I'm answering a question. So the choice for everybody, there's only going to be one of two people who's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer or myself. A vote for anyone who's not a Conservative candidate is just make it more likely that Keir Starmer is that person. So if you are someone, you say, what makes a Conservative? If you're someone who wants lower taxes, if you want your pension protected, if you want migration reduced, if you want a sensible approach to net zero that prioritises our security and reducing people's bills, that's what I will offer you in this election.
So you won't talk about Nigel Farage at all. You see, a lot of people looking at him and you, they think, these Conservatives, that he's a kind of Sunday roast with all the trimmings and you're a quinoa salad.
Well, I think the policies are what matter. The substance is what matter, Nick. So I know we're going to get into it, but you're asking me about personalities.
I'm asking you about Nigel Farage, and people are noting you don't want to talk about him. So let's talk about policy if you don't want to talk about him.
It's not that I'm not willing. I'm willing to talk about everything here. But the simple issue here is a vote for anyone else, including Nigel Farage's party, and I would make the same point about anyone's party, right, is ultimately a vote that makes it more likely that Keir Starmer is in power. And you said to me, well, are you a Conservative enough? Well, here's what we're offering. Lower taxes, protected pensions, increase in defence spending, a more sensible approach to net zero, and a clear plan to both stop the boats and bring down the levels of migration. That is what I'm talking to the country about.
Well, let's talk about it now.
For people.
Let's talk about it now. Now, let's talk about policy, promises, plans. People you once said don't want politicians who promise the earth and then fail to deliver. So I want to take you through some of your promises. You promised when you became Prime Minister to cut NHS waiting lists. Have they gone up or down since you made that pledge?
I've been very clear. We have not made as much progress on NHS waiting lists as I would have liked, and they have risen.
They've gone up.
Yeah. They are now coming down. And after we've got through the industrial action and resolved it with all parts of the NHS workforce except the junior doctors, what you have seen over the past few months is now the waiting lists are starting to fall by about 200,000 over the past few months. And if we stick to that plan, we can make more progress.
Isn't the problem with that argument, though? Waiting lists haven't just gone up under Rishi Sunak. They went up under Liz Truss. They went up under Boris Johnson. They went up under Theresa May. They went up under David Cameron. Conservative prime ministers for 14 years, long before COVID, long before strikes, have put NHS waiting lists up.
Well, the NHS has undeniably been under pressure for a while. That was exacerbated by what happened in the pandemic. I think most reasonable people can see that. But this election is about the future. It's where do we go from here? And as I said, we're investing record sums in the NHS, recruiting and training more doctors and nurses, and doing things innovatively, for example, expanding the range of services that people can go and see their pharmacist for. And I'm the son of a pharmacist and a GP, so it's something I grew up with. And what we are doing is saying if you've got a sore throat or an ear infection now, you don't need to get the GP appointment for you or your kids. You can go straight to your pharmacist and get the medicines that you need. That's an example of making care faster for people, and it will make a difference. Now, of course, it will take time to recover from the pandemic, but we are now on the right track.
I think the worry people have when they look at that record is they think it's all right for Conservative leaders. What they can do is go private, pay, and skip the queue.
I come from an NHS family. So my dad was a GP, my mum was a pharmacist. I was surrounded... Healthcare. Yes, I have done in the past, but I also use the NHS and rely on the NHS, as do my kids. But at the end of the day, I was raised in an NHS family surrounded by people who dedicated their lives to the NHS, talking at home about what more they could do to look after their patients. And that's how I think about the NHS today, which is why, as I said, we're backing it with record funding and more doctors and nurses. And now, as you can see, we are bringing the waiting list down after what has been a difficult period.
Forgive me interrupting. We've got a lot to get through in our half hour or so. You want to talk about immigration. You said you did at the beginning, and you promised to control our borders. But the number of people arriving here legally under the new immigration rules introduced after Brexit, and you campaigned vigorously for Brexit, reached a record high. Last year, 685,000 extra people came here. That's twice the population of Coventry. You didn't control our borders, did you?
No, the numbers are too high. I've been very clear about that. But people can judge me as well on what I've done as Prime Minister, where I've put in place the biggest, strictest reforms to bring down immigration that we've seen. What the forecasts now show is that the levels of net migration are due to halve over the next 12 months or so. The number of visas that we issued at the beginning of this year is down already by a quarter, so that shows we're now on the right track. And if I'm re-elected, what we will introduce is a legal cap on migration that parliamentarians will vote on every year, so that not just will we halve the levels of net migration, we will continue to reduce them year on year.
Here's the problem
And that's
Rishi
the
Sunak
choice
says,
of this election.
I promised to control immigration. I haven't done it yet, but I promise I will. But every single Prime Minister for 14 years under the Conservatives said they would reduce immigration.
Well,
David Cameron didn't do it. Theresa May didn't do it. Boris Johnson didn't do it. Liz Truss didn't do it. And now Rishi Sunak
It's not quite right what you said. Actually, we've just had the numbers for last year, so the first full year that I was Prime Minister. It showed that net migration was down 10% from the levels that I inherited. And this year so far, the number of visas that we've issued in the main categories is down by a quarter because of the reforms that I've brought in.
Massively higher than the promise that was originally made when the Conservatives
you
were
said
elected.
your point to me was that I hadn't done anything about it. That's not right. I've instituted reforms that last year meant the numbers were down by 10%, as we've seen, but this year the number of visas issued are down by a quarter. The forecasts are now for net migration to halve. And again, yes, that's the past. This election's about the future. I've got a clear plan with a legal migration cap to guarantee that the numbers continue falling. Labour have not matched that. They don't have any plan to bring the numbers down and indeed oppose the measures that I've already taken. And that's the choice facing people on migration at this election.
It's a choice that depends on people giving you more time to deliver what you're saying. You promised you'd stop the boats. So far this year, more than 11,000 people have crossed the channel, record high. You've not stopped the boats. Why do you deserve more time to try to do it?
Because from the first time that small boats became a phenomenon a few years ago, we got the numbers down last year by a third. That had never happened before. Everyone, when I got this job, said to me, you won't be able to do anything about this problem. Well, because of our plan, we've got the numbers down by a third last year.
Now they're going back up again. You've got a record number this year.
But if we stick to our plan, we will continue to bring them down. Why? Because if I'm re-elected as Prime Minister, we will get flights off to Rwanda and establish a deterrent. So very simply, my view that illegal migration is unfair, and the only way to fully solve this problem is for people to know that if they come to our country illegally, they won't be able to stay. And that means we have to have somewhere safe to return them. And if I'm Prime Minister, the flights will go, the deterrent will be built.
But why not wait, Prime Minister? You say the flights will go to Rwanda. You say they'll go in just a few weeks' time. You had the opportunity to prove it. You could have said to everybody, here are the flights. People have gone to Rwanda. Here's the deterrent. The numbers are falling. You didn't. You cut and run. You had the election before. And now we have to take it on trust.
Well, no, because as I said, we got the numbers down by a third last year. That had never happened before.
How many people have gone to Rwanda in the 3 years since you announced that you would do this?
Because it's taken time to get this through Parliament because we've been frustrated. Yes, and this election's about the future. And there's a clear choice, Nick. Right? If you believe, like I do, the only way to solve this problem is to have a deterrent, we're the only party that can deliver that for you. And again, the Labour Party have no answer. At the debate the other week, I asked Keir Starmer, what would the Labour Party do with migrants who come to our country illegally? Time after time, he couldn't answer the question. Now, I have a plan. People may not all agree with it, but it is a clear plan that, by the way, almost 20 other European countries now agree is the right approach to dealing with this problem.
But if
and
you
if
forgive me, when you say you've
elected,
got a
that
plan,
deterrent will be built.
You sound to me like a guy in a pub who borrows 50 quid. And he borrowed it 3 years ago. And he keeps saying, don't worry, I'll pay you back. And then when you confront him in the pub, he says, I'll pay you tomorrow. You wouldn't believe him, would you? You constantly promising what you will do, but what you haven't done so far.
We got the numbers down by a third last year. That had never happened before. Never, ever. The numbers had just gone up and up and up until I became Prime Minister. The numbers were down by a third last year, so people can trust me. We've got a plan. The airfield is on standby. The planes are booked. Migrants have been detained. The caseworkers are working. And if I'm Prime Minister, the flights will go. We will build that deterrent. And then that's how we will stop the boats. And again, there is no answer from the Labour Party as to what they will do with illegal migrants. And that's the choice at this election.
I will put that to Sir Keir Starmer when he is in that chair. Now, we've talked about your promises, and we've heard that not all of them have been delivered. Now, ever since this election was called, we've had endless promises. I've got all your Tory press releases here. a promise of national service, couple of billion there, a promise for a tax cut for pensioners, a promise of a tax cut for parents, more apprenticeship, more police officers, endless promises of more and more money from the Conservatives. Have you found the magic money tree?
No, every single one of those policies that you've just been through is fully funded and costed, as is explained in every single one of those press releases, as indeed when we set out our manifesto tomorrow, people will be able to see all the details behind it even further.
And tomorrow you'll promise more tax cuts.
We will have a manifesto tomorrow that builds on all the things that you've just gone through, that we've already announced in this campaign, that yes, does continue to cut people's taxes, because I believe in a country where people's hard work is rewarded. And there's a clear choice in contrast at this election. Our party, the Conservatives, are promising and will deliver tax cuts, building on the tax cuts that we have already started to deliver, and have ruled out tax rises. That's not what the Labour Party are doing. They are being open that some taxes are going to go up, but what they're not telling everyone is that there is a £2,000 tax bill waiting for working families across our country if they are elected. And that is the choice for people.
We'll come to that disputed figure maybe in a second. You say that you're cutting taxes. You've got a bit of a nerve, haven't you? Under Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor and then Prime Minister, the total tax bill in this country has gone up by £93 billion a year. That's even more than Jeremy Corbyn wants to put on people.
And as you and I have discussed many times, Nick, what's happened in that period? We were hit by a once-in-a-century pandemic and then an energy crisis. The government rightly stepped in at both of those moments to provide an enormous amount of support to people, to families, with their energy bills, with furlough, the NHS. That was the right thing to do. And of course, it's difficult, but right to make sure that we pay that back.
And that's why the tax burden.
Can I just continue? Can I answer your question? Let me just. Can I just finish answering a question? So the context is important. I'm not going to shy away from what happened. I did make those difficult decisions because that's right for the financial security of our country. But now taxes are being cut. The average tax rate faced by a typical person in work is the lowest it has been in over half a century. So yes, you're right about the overall tax burden, but for someone in work, an ordinary average worker, today, they face the lowest average tax rate that they have faced in over half a century because of what we have done. And we've already started, Nick, with a £900 tax cut this year.
Income tax going up this year. Income tax going up next year. Income tax going up the next year. Year after year after year, you are increasing the income tax.
Nick,
are people watching this programme, but you come in interviews and say, I'm cutting your tax.
Nick, the facts are very clear, and I'm sure your team will be able to provide them for you. Right now, with all the changes, because there's lots of changes that go on in a system, right now, an average worker is facing the lowest tax rate on their earnings that they have seen in this country for over 50 years.
You're talking about the tax rate, Prime Minister, which is very convenient for you because it's thresholds.
No, it combines. But no, Nick, that combines. It combines thresholds and the rate.
Forgive me.
The effective tax rate taken together for an average worker today, combining thresholds and the rate, is the lowest it has been in over 50 years. And when we finish this interview, your team will be able to show you that. I will be able to show you it as well.
I will tell you that
and
somebody on the minimum wage loses much more money from the change, from the freezing of income tax thresholds.
Nick, someone on the national living wage is this year seeing an £1,800 increase in their wages because of what this Conservative government has done. The proportion of people on low pay in this country is the lowest it has been since the records began.
Let's just check a
So
fact.
we have disproportionately made sure that those on the lowest incomes are seeing their wages rise the fastest under this Conservative government, as well as cutting taxes for everyone in work. That is what we are doing.
You've made your point. 3.7 million more people will pay income tax for the first time because of your policies. 2.7 million extra people will pay higher rate tax because of your policies. So you are increasing some taxes, income tax in particular, while you're cutting national insurance. So let's turn to the Labour Party. You've got a bit of a nerve, haven't you, having a go at the Labour Party? You've raised our taxes by record amounts, £93 billion. You produce some figures, criticised by the boss of the Treasury, criticised by the chair of the UK Statistics Authority, criticised by the former head of the civil service. And yet you come to this interview and you repeat something that you've said that they all think is misleading.
Because it's right. and the choice of this election is clear. We are going to keep cutting people's taxes. You'll see that in our manifesto tomorrow. You've seen it in the announcements that we've already made. Labour Party are going to put people's taxes up. We have been through their policies.
That independent Treasury officials had costed Labour policies. Yes. Independent Treasury officials didn't produce that figure that you keep repeating.
So there are 27 policies, as the letter from the Permanent Secretary.
Did they produce that figure, Prime Minister?
Let me explain. There are 27 different policies that underpin that figure. Of those 27, 21 are produced by independent Treasury officials, available online for people to see. 3 come from other government sources, 2 come from the Labour Party themselves, and 1 comes from an independent investment bank. Every single one of them is available, transparent, and you top them all up, and it amounts to £2,000 worth of tax rises for every working family in our country.
Yeah. When you say top them all up, what you mean is when
election.
Tory researchers top them all up, treat 4 years of figures as if it's 1 year, divide it between all the families, which no economist would ever do. You then produce a Conservative press release, and you claim that it's been produced by the Treasury when it hasn't. It's a Conservative figure.
Let's go through it again, Nick.
No,
there are 27. There are 27.
Something else.
Well, no, but you've made a point which isn't right. There are 27 figures, 27 policies. 21 of them are costed by the Treasury. 2 of them are from the Labour Party themselves. 3 from government sources, and 1 from an independent investment bank. You top them all up, divided by the number of households, and that's how you get £2,094 for every working family in our country. And I don't want to see that happen. And that is what the Labour Party will do. That's what a future Labour government has got in store. By the way,
let's not run out of time, Prime Minister. We've other things to talk about. You've made your point. You think it's valid. I put to you that other people do not think it's valid. I will ask Keir Starmer about his tax plans when he's here in a little while.
Well, I noticed his spokesman today has ruled out yet again, has been refused to rule out tax rises yet again today.
Now, you've also said in the past, you said it on the steps of Downing Street, I'll always be honest with you, you said, about what is needed, even when that is difficult. Will you be honest with people tonight and say, my government will have to, given my plans, cut spending by a significant amount in many government departments?
No, that's not what our plans show. And indeed, public spending will continue to grow. It will continue to be at record levels. It will continue to grow ahead of inflation. That's what our plans have.
Total government spending. If you spend, as you're promising...
No,
Do you want me to go through all your press releases? If you spend more and more, what we know is that you'll spend less on certain departments. The head of the Office for Budget Responsibility described government spending plans as a work of fiction. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies said you might have to cut £18 billion a year. That's the equivalent of every police force in England and Wales. You're going to have to cut in certain areas, aren't you?
No.
Because
day-to-day public spending, you said overall government spending, actually day-to-day spending on government services under a future Conservative government will continue to increase ahead of inflation. Now, of course, all governments prioritise within that, but what we'd also want to focus on is productivity. Right now, the government is spending more of everyone else's money than it has in a very, very long time. Productivity in the public sector has fallen considerably since COVID. And if we recover just the pre-COVID levels of productivity, so nothing heroic, just as productive as we were before the pandemic hit, you mentioned a figure, that productivity gain is worth £20 billion. So yes, I'm not going to apologise for finding more efficiencies in the public sector, which, by the way, they were performing at just a few years ago, so that we don't have to raise people's taxes and we can continue to cut them. Yes. And that figure is also something that the independent controllers have pointed to as an opportunity for efficiency
savings.
Here's
the difficulty with what you're saying. You're saying to the public, you can have all these goodies, we'll cut your taxes, we'll unveil more tax cuts in our manifesto. Nothing in spending has to be cut at all. That's all increasing at all. You're sounding very like Liz Truss, aren't you?
No, not at all, actually, because every one of those policies is paid essentially by 2 things. One is tax avoidance and evasion, which on average over the last 14 years has raised £6.7 billion a year. We're only assuming that we continue to raise 6, so it's a Conservative estimate. And the remainder of the savings come from a reform to the welfare system. Welfare is currently growing at an unsustainable rate. We've set out a comprehensive plan to reform it, to support people into work. Just return things back to pre-pandemic levels would save £30 billion when it comes to ill health. We're not assuming anything like that. Just £12 billion, and those 2 things will pay for all the things that we've just been through.
I want to ask you about one other policy area, which has been raised by many of our viewers. It's housing. Many people are forced, even in their 30s, to live at home with mum and dad. They simply can't afford the rent, let alone afford to buy a house. Having your own home has got harder under a Conservative government, hasn't it?
It has got harder, and I want to make sure that it's easier. And what we will do is not just build homes in the right places and do that in a way that is sensitive to local communities, but make sure that we support young people into great jobs so they can save for that deposit. And I'm going to go back to tax because it is important.
You're talking about people who, like you, had the money to buy a home. Most young people are not worrying about the deposit. They're not worrying about stamp duty.
Actually,
they don't want another tax cut. They can't afford to leave the home of mum and dad.
No, actually, when I speak to people, it is the deposit, Nick, that is the biggest challenge, because many people earn enough to cover a mortgage payment, but the struggle is saving up for a deposit. That has always, over the last few years, been the number one challenge. But what will make it harder is saddling young people with higher taxes. I think people working hard should keep more of their money. No young person is going to find it any easier to buy the home that I want them to have to fulfil those aspirations if they're saddled with £2,000 worth of higher taxes from the Labour Party.
Now, Prime Minister, we've gone through lots of policy. There's lots of other policy we could have talked about. There'll be other opportunities to do that. But I want to close by asking you whether you really think the Conservatives deserve another 5 years in power. Many viewers have told us, they've got in touch with the BBC and says, nothing works in this country. You can't get a GP appointment, you can't get to dentist, you can't afford somewhere to live, the trains don't run on time, sewage get pumped into the rivers and the sea. Why do you deserve another chance?
Well, we haven't got time to go over all the things of the last 14 years. I point out one thing which you failed to mention on your list. Thanks to the Conservative education reforms, our children in this country are not just the best readers in the UK, they're the best readers in the Western world. We've transformed possibilities for young people because of our education reforms, but this election is about the future. And we have been through a tough few years, that's undeniable, but I believe we've turned the corner now. And that this election is about building on the progress that we've made, delivering a secure future for everyone, where their taxes are cut, their pensions are protected, migration is coming down, and we get to net zero in a more sensible way. That's what I offer at this election. I'm prepared to take bold action. I've got a clear plan to deliver that. And in contrast, the Labour Party are asking for a blank cheque. They won't tell you what they're going to spend it on, and they won't tell you which of your taxes are going to go up to pay for it. And that is the choice at this election.
After 14 years, 5 Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson lying about parties, Liz Truss almost crashing the economy, and you bunking off D-Day, after all the broken promises, you really think you deserve another chance?
I've been very clear in the past, no government gets everything right, but I am proud of what has been achieved over 14 years. This election is also about the future. We have a clear plan. I'm prepared to take bold action to cut people's taxes, protect their pensions, and bring migration down. And in contrast, Labour are just going to put everyone's taxes up. That's a choice.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak,
thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me.